Imagine a single word.
Just one word.
Right. Just
Wow.
one translated word from centuries ago that essentially dictates the modern rules of marriage and relationships and morality for, millions of people today.
It's wild to think about.
It really is. So, welcome to the deep dive. You are here with us as the third person in this conversation, and we are about to go on a really fascinating intellectual journey.
So welcome to Call for Wisdom, and I'm going to do a deep dive with these virtual podcasters. Virtual, all right? But they are critiquing my content on Call for Wisdom. My name is Deborah, and I have a lot of controversial content about biblical marriage and my stance on polygyny, the man's biblical right and option to have more than one wife. So if you want to get into a deep dive about it with me, hang in there because I'm using two AI generated, disclaimer, podcasters who have gone through my materials and now are critiquing it, and they are liberal. Okay, so they're not biased, they're liberal. And I want to know what you think of, first of all, of this content, and if they have anything positive to say about my take on First Corinthians, because when we think about it in the New Testament, a lot of times Paul is misunderstood, mistranslated by the translator bias of prescriptive monogamy. So when Paul is talking about in First Corinthians 1, 7 verse 2, about a man having his own wife and a wife having her own husband, and a lot of people take that as meaning that Paul is prescribing monogamy only. And I'm asking, is that true? So right now, they're going to be joining me with these podcasters. Listen in. I'm not going to be talking much in this episode. So listen in about that, and we'll just review it together, okay? It's all about me and my ideas. Not really. It's biblical. Here we go.
Imagine a single word.
Just one word.
Right. Just
Wow.
one translated word from centuries ago that essentially dictates the modern rules of marriage and relationships and morality for, millions of people today.
It's wild to think about.
It really is. So, welcome to the deep dive. You are here with us as the third person in this conversation, and we are about to go on a really fascinating intellectual journey. Today, we're looking at how a seemingly straightforward translation of an ancient Greek word might have completely rewritten the original intent of a foundational text.
Yeah, we are examining a YouTube post and its comment section, actually, from a channel called Call for Wisdom.
Authored by someone known as Sister Deborah.
Exactly. And she is responding to a Torah observant woman who is asking for clarity on a very famous, very widely quoted biblical verse, 1 Corinthians 7, verse 2.
So the mission of this deep dive today is to explore how digging into the historical context of that specific verse and, specifically unpacking the ancient root of just one translated word can completely upend our standard interpretation of the text.
We are talking about challenging the foundational assumption that this specific verse mandates strict monogamy.
Right. The source material we're looking at explores the argument that the text actually allows for polygyny,
which is a man having multiple wives.
Exactly. Now, before we go any further, I need to make something crystal clear. In this deep dive, we are not endorsing any specific theological viewpoints.
No, not at all.
We are not advocating for any particular lifestyle choices, and we're definitely not taking sides in this religious or cultural discussion. Our job here is strictly to act as your guides. We're just impartially mapping out the fascinating arguments, the history and the linguistic interpretations presented in the specific source material.
We're dissecting the mechanics of the argument. Like, we're looking at how the case is built piece by piece, using linguistics and historical context to arrive at a conclusion that challenges centuries of tradition.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the verse itself so everyone is on the exact same page.
A good idea.
It's 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 2. In English, it typically reads, "Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own woman, and let every woman have her own man."
Right.
When you hear those words, like in our current cultural context, the immediate reflex is to read that as a strict, unbending mathematical equation.
Yeah, 1 to 1.
One man can only ever have one wife. The phrase "his own" immediately triggers a sense of absolute exclusivity in our modern brains. It sounds like an impenetrable boundary line being drawn.
What's fascinating here is the actual historical context the source provides to counter that modern reflex.
Because it wasn't written in a vacuum.
Exactly. First Corinthians is a letter written by Paul the Apostle to the people of Corinth. And to understand what Paul was actually saying, we have to understand the mechanics of the city he was writing to.
Right.
Corinth was not some quiet, puritanical town.
Not at all.
It was a massive, bustling Roman colony. It was a major trade hub situated on an isthmus between two really busy ports.
So lots of sailors, lots of transient workers.
Yes, exactly. It was an extremely sexualized culture. Rampant promiscuity was just the baseline there.
It was the ancient world's ultimate party city, essentially.
Yeah, wealth,
Mhm.
traders coming in and out constantly, and institutionalized prostitution.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the city was famous for the temple of Aphrodite, the goddess of love, which sat high above the city on the Acrocorinth. And according to historical accounts, the temple employed upwards of 1,000 temple prostitutes.
1,000. That is a massive operation.
It was. Sex with multiple partners wasn't just a weekend indulgence. It was integrated into local economy and even their pagan religious worship.
Wow.
So Paul is writing to new believers who had just come out of that exact lifestyle. They were entirely culturally conditioned to view sleeping with whoever they wanted, whenever they wanted, as completely normal.
So the source's argument is that Paul isn't sitting down to write a comprehensive dictionary definition of the numerical limits of marriage. He is addressing an immediate behavioral crisis. It's like a driving instructor yelling at a student to just stay in your lane because the student keeps swerving into oncoming traffic and nearly causing pileups.
That's a great way to put it.
The instructor isn't trying to explain how the combustion engine works. They aren't trying to outline the legal limits of how many cars a person can own in their lifetime.
No, of course not.
They are just aggressively trying to address the immediate dangerous behavior happening right in front of them in the driver's seat.
That analogy captures the pragmatism of Paul's letter perfectly. He is instructing the men to stop visiting temple prostitutes.
Right.
He is instructing the women to stop giving themselves to men who aren't their husbands. Sister Deborah emphasizes that the core mechanism Paul is utilizing here is a call for self-control.
Just keep sex inside the boundaries of your marriage.
Exactly. The argument is that this text simply wasn't designed to establish a quota on how many wives a man could have.
But if Paul is just doing crowd control on rampant promiscuity, why has the modern world spent 2,000 years treating this verse as a strict mathematical equation?
That's the big question.
Because that misinterpretation has to come from somewhere. And the source argues it all comes down to the English translation of a single word, the word own. Let every man have his own woman.
Right. Trace that English word own back to the original Greek that Paul actually wrote in, and you find the word idios.
Idios.
Yeah. According to the source, the fundamental definition of idios is belonging to you. It establishes a relationship. It establishes a connection. It is a relational marker, not a numerical limit.
Okay, wait, let me push back on that a little bit.
Sure.
Even if own means belonging to, couldn't Paul still be implying a strict one-to-one belonging? Like if I say to you, I'm going to go brush my teeth with my own toothbrush, I definitely mean just one toothbrush.
Right.
And I definitely mean it belongs exclusively to me. It is not communal property. So how does the source prove that idios functions communally rather than exclusively?
Well, the toothbrush analogy is exactly how a modern English speaker processes the concept of ownership as exclusive physical property.
Yeah, exactly.
But the source provides two really plain language analogies to explain how this Greek root functions differently in practice. Sister Deborah asks the audience to consider how we use own in a relational context rather than a property context.
All right.
The first example she gives is about a town. If a woman says, I'm going back to my own town, she obviously doesn't mean she's the only person who lives in that town.
Oh, I see. So the phrase her own town just means that is the town she belongs to.
Exactly. She has a recognized connection to it.
Mhm.
She doesn't hold the deed to the entire municipality.
Okay, that makes sense.
The second example the source uses drills down even further into familial relationships. Imagine a father who has 3 daughters.
All right.
If he points to one of them and introduces her by saying, this is my own daughter, he is establishing a biological and relational connection.
He's claiming her as his family.
Yes. Does that statement automatically dictate that he only has one child? Does it erase the existence of the other 2 daughters?
It definitely doesn't. And actually, a commenter on the Call for Wisdom channel made a joke about this that really hammered the point home for me.
What'd they say?
They said, imagine if the phrase his own really truly meant only one in existence. Suddenly, that father with 3 daughters says, "This is my own daughter," and the other 2 daughters are looking around the room going, "Wait, am I adopted?"
That is hilarious, but it really points out the absurdity of applying strict numerical limits to relational words.
Right.
So when you apply that relational understanding to 1 Corinthians 7, verse 2, the entire meaning shifts. When Paul writes his own woman, the argument is that he means the woman who belongs to him in a marital covenant.
Right. And when he writes her own man, it means the husband she belongs to.
Exactly. It is
Yeah.
entirely about who you are attached to legitimately, rather than limiting the quantity of those attachments to an exclusive 1-to-1 ratio.
I mean, to bring the listener into this, think about how you use relational language every day. You might say, "my own team at work," or "my own friend group." You are claiming a connection to a collective, not claiming you are the solitary member.
Yes, that's exactly it.
And the YouTube audience actually brought even more linguistic evidence to the table to back this up. A commenter named at Psalms 8511 pointed out another verse, Matthew chapter 9, verse 1.
Yes, that was a brilliant catch by that commenter. The verse states that Jesus came into his own city.
And in the original Greek text, it uses the exact same word, idios.
Yep. And just like the town analogy we just talked about,
Yeah.
it clearly implies a shared communal connection. He wasn't the sole resident of the city.
Right.
The audience engaged with the mechanics of the linguistics and found it completely supported the source's interpretation of a shared belonging rather than singular property.
So we have a really compelling linguistic argument for the word idios, and we have the historical context of Corinth's party culture. But a single verse doesn't exist in a vacuum.
No, it doesn't.
It has to fit into the entire ecosystem of the book it belongs to. If this interpretation is correct, how does it hold up against the broader context of biblical precedent?
Well, Sister Deborah grounds her argument in earlier scriptures to show that this interpretation of idios aligns perfectly with established historical texts.
Okay.
She points directly to the Old Testament, specifically to foundational, highly revered figures like Abraham, Jacob, and David.
Because these men practiced polygyny.
Exactly. They openly had multiple wives.
And the text refers to those unions as valid marriages. It does not classify them as fornication.
Which is key here.
Right, because fornication, as defined by the text itself, is sexual activity outside of a recognized marriage.
Yes, and the source goes beyond just pointing out famous examples. She points to the actual legal framework of the time. She cites Exodus chapter 21, verse 10.
Right.
This is a crucial piece of the argument because it provides explicit instructions and regulations for what a man must do if he takes another wife.
So it's actively regulated.
Yes. The text dictates that if he takes a second wife, he cannot diminish the food, clothing, or marital rights of the first wife.
It functions essentially as an ancient consumer protection law for marriage. Like, it regulates the practice to ensure fairness and provision. It doesn't ban it.
This raises an important question. If polygyny was already allowed, culturally recognized, and actively regulated by laws designed to protect women in the earlier scriptures, it makes very little logical sense that Paul would be secretly banning the practice entirely in a casual letter to the Corinthians.
Especially without explicitly stating he was overturning established divine law.
Exactly. A commenter named At the Soothing Well made an incredibly sharp point regarding the legality of this.
Yeah, I saw that.
They pointed out that if Paul did make polygyny illegal with that single, vaguely translated sentence, he would technically be violating the law by changing it without authority.
Yeah, the commenter summarized the whole dynamic perfectly. They stated, people act like Paul made polygyny illegal. Meanwhile, Paul is just over here trying to tell people to stop sleeping around.
It's so true. It forces the reader to look at the continuity of the entire religious document. You cannot isolate a single sentence, run it through a modern English dictionary, and ignore thousands of years of established legal precedent detailed in the preceding chapters.
Right.
But to fully grasp how the source is applying this, we have to unpack how Sister Deborah defines the very concept of marriage itself, because it is wildly different from how we define it today.
Because when you or I say marriage today, we think of a very specific state-sanctioned modern institution. But she's talking about something much older. She calls it biblical marriage before Yah.
Yes, which functions as a covenant.
And she's very specific about the mechanics of what a covenant is not.
Very.
It is not modern dating. It is not having a boyfriend. It's certainly not a secret situationship where two people just decide they are together. And perhaps most jarringly to a modern audience, she states it absolutely does not require a state-issued marriage license.
That's the part that really trips people up today.
Right. Instead, it is defined purely as a committed union, specifically requiring the initial blessing of the woman's father, where a man publicly agrees to take the woman as his wife.
That's the entire mechanism.
No paperwork filed at the county clerk's office. No tax implications.
In ancient cultures, a father's blessing was a public communal contract. It wasn't just a sweet tradition before the wedding where you ask permission.
Right, it had real weight.
It was the legal mechanism that bound the families and the individuals. It established the covenant in the eyes of the community.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about what happens if we completely remove the modern state license from the equation of marriage.
Okay.
If marriage is purely a committed, recognized union between individuals and families based on a promise, doesn't that place the ultimate burden of sexual responsibility and moral self-control squarely on the individuals themselves?
It absolutely does.
Which brings us right back to exactly what Paul was instructing the Corinthians to do in the first place.
Stripping away the bureaucratic layer makes marriage a purely moral and relational responsibility. You attach yourself to your spouse, and you honor that commitment through your daily actions.
Yeah.
You don't outsource the legitimacy of the relationship to a piece of paper signed by a judge. You prove the legitimacy of the relationship through your self-control.
Okay, we've dissected the history of Corinth's promiscuity, the communal linguistics of the Greek word idios, and the broader legal precedent of the Old Testament. The argument is incredibly structured.
It really is piece by piece.
But we have to look at how this interpretation is actually landing with modern audiences. Like people reading this today, scrolling through YouTube on their phones.
The reaction in the comment section is fascinating. It is overwhelmingly supportive.
Yeah, I was surprised by that.
The post generated well over 100 likes, actually 117 to be exact. And the comments are filled with people calling the breakdown wise, referring to it as the truth, and actively thanking the author for providing teaching on polygyny.
But they weren't just nodding along to historical theology. They were actively taking these ancient concepts and overlaying them onto modern society. This is where the deep dive hit the real world for me.
Oh, yeah.
A commenter named at Geno Basquez 8361 brought up a completely modern scenario that blew my mind. They mentioned a video on TikTok showcasing a church singles event. According to the commenter, there were 1,000 women at this event and 0 men.
Wow. Let that demographic reality sink in for a moment. 1,000 women looking for a partner, 0 men available.
The sheer scale of that imbalance is staggering. It is a literal demographic drought.
Yeah.
And the commenter's mathematical conclusion to this massive disparity was incredibly stark. They wrote, 5 women will need to take 1 man.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is incredible to witness the mechanics of what is happening here.
It really is.
You have a modern audience utilizing an ancient textual interpretation, an interpretation based entirely on the Greek root of a single translated word from thousands of years ago, to make sense of and potentially solve very real, very modern societal shifts.
They are looking at the modern dating landscape, seeing a massive structural imbalance that leaves hundreds of women without options, and they're finding a functional solution in a historical linguistic breakdown of a letter written to a pagan party city in ancient Greece.
It reveals how deeply people are searching for functional frameworks to understand the world around them.
Absolutely.
When the current cultural frameworks, like strict, modern, state-licensed monogamy, feel like they are failing to account for demographic realities, people will dig into the roots of their foundational texts to see if the rules are actually as rigid as they were taught.
So what does this all mean? Let's pull these threads together. The core takeaway from the source material is that by examining the hypersexualized history of the city of Corinth, and by understanding the communal relational translation of the Greek word idios, we arrive at a completely different understanding of 1 Corinthians 7, verse 2.
The argument is that this verse is a mandate for self-control and marital commitment. It is a directive to stop utilizing temple prostitutes and keep sex within a covenant.
Right. It is not, historically or linguistically, a mathematical mandate for strict monogamy.
And why should you care about this deep dive, regardless of your personal beliefs on marriage, dating, or theology?
Yeah, why does it matter?
Because it serves as a profound, almost jarring reminder of how deeply our modern cultural lenses distort the information we consume every single day. A single translated word, just the 3-letter word own, can carry centuries of unchecked assumptions.
We read an ancient text and we instinctively assume the author is using our modern English dictionary. We assume they are operating under our modern cultural norms and referring to our modern legal frameworks involving state licenses and tax brackets. We assume own means exclusive physical property, like a toothbrush, instead of relational belonging, like a family.
When we finally strip those modern assumptions away and look at the actual historical and linguistic roots, the original intent and the mechanics of the ancient world can be wildly different from what we've been conditioned to see.
Which leaves us with one final provocative thought for you to chew on today. Think about the contracts you sign, the moral codes you follow, the social agreements you navigate every day with your friends, family, and colleagues.
Yeah.
If a word as seemingly straightforward, as incredibly basic as own, can radically shift from meaning exclusive individual property to communal relational belonging based entirely on its historical context, what other foundational words in our daily lives might mean something entirely different than what we assume?
Somebody to really think about.
Keep questioning, keep digging, and we will see you on the next deep dive.
Wow, that was really good, I think. They went through my content, they found this, they discussed it. I'm going to have more of these deep dives with these two podcasters. If you liked it, leave a comment below. If you think that Paul was promoting monogamy, leave it below. If you don't think he did, and he actually meant as a communal own, then leave a comment below. So whatever you believe, just leave a comment below. That's my point. Welcome again to Call for Wisdom, and look up the article that I wrote that was the source of this. In the community post on Call for Wisdom, we have a lot of theological deep dives going on there all the time. And if you have any suggestions, you can give me some more by email. My email is mycallforwisdom@yahoo.com. If you're a sister, because this is a Bible study for sisters, you can always email me and I will get back to you as soon as I can. And very soon we'll have also some call-ins that you can call and ask a question. Okay, so I will leave in the description some more information about how you can contact me if you're a sister and would like to get some counseling one-on-one with me and some prayer support, these kind of things. So blessings and everybody. This is take 2, by the way. I tried it earlier on. It didn't work out. So if you're following this again, thanks for coming all the way to the end. Blessings and take care.